on? You're live. So, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I am Deb Coviello on Drop-In CEO Live Talk Media with my special guest today, Dirk H. Horn. So, we had a great conversation yesterday. He's been a guest on my podcast, but there is so much depth into what he does. So, just very briefly, a mutual colleague of ours introduced us, Brent Ness. So, shout out to him. But Dirk has an amazing amount of experience, over 17 years in corporate human resources. He's worked across many industries and globally. And so we're going to go a little deeper into this conversation. So Dirk, welcome and thank you for let's having some more conversation about culture.
Thanks, having me as a guest. It's an honor. Thank you.
All right. So we're just going to go right to it. So you have shared with me that the greatest learnings that we can have are by our experiences and sometimes our failures. So you have a great story that you want to share about international failure.
Yes. So thanks, Deb. Usually what we do when I look, sometimes I look back at the end of the year and I realize I've been doing business in maybe 8, 9, or 10 different countries in that very year. It changes from year to year. This year is apparently different. Nobody really travels, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I thought when we're talking about these experiences with other cultures and other countries, why not start with a failure and not because success is always nice, but I believe you learn more from failure. So last year, I wear it with pride because you learn from mistakes, hopefully, right? I had a completely new client, someone who knew me from a previous assignment, asked me to work with a subdivision, get the team, some team building in place and help them review their strategy. And that all went very well. And sometime in the process, the HR on a higher hierarchy level asked me, hey, what about you coaching the subdivision lead? Not as a corrective measure, but something the guy has potential at, and they thought the guy could greatly benefit from working with me. And I'd love to. Mm-hmm. I'm super excited about helping people. By the way, I should mention this is all mm-hmm. French, all French people, me being in France. So, he says you should talk to the group CEO because that the subdivision lead is basically his employee and you should, and I said, that's wonderful. So, spring break last year, we're in the Florida Keys, and I remember it's not made up. It actually happened on that. Is it the 7 or the 13-mile bridge? I can't remember. We were on the middle of the ocean in the car, and the guy called me. So I, in the car, is like everybody, I didn't. Maybe I said shut up, but it's I said please be quiet. So and then we had a good discussion. French CEO, like the Monsieur le Président. And I felt we have a connection. We talked about what I could do for his guy and so on and so forth. And in retrospect, I probably missed a thing he said. And he said, I'm going to give you a signal. What I took the spirit of that discussion, because the spirit was about development, went back to the subdivision lead and said, talk to your boss. It's in the making. And I think we can start preparing our work. So we agreed, okay, so we'll meet up in Paris next week for 1.5 days. It's a good, it's easy from New York to get into Paris and so on. So, so we discussed that and he was happy, I was happy. And I thought that's going to be a cool ride. A couple of days later, I get a call from the CEO. He's almost yelling at me and says I was insubordinate. And okay, so I'm like, I need to understand this. And then he says, he told me that he would give me the signal, the go ahead. And I marched before that signal. And as a consequence of that, I lost a complete client. I wasn't able to work with either the leader or the team or anything. So he completely cut the cord. And then, we're all still talking, not me with the CEO, but me with everyone else. And we're still sad this happened. I should have known better. I learned something, and I don't want to, generalize all French people, but something I've learned 20 years ago. There's a different way of making a decision in France and then getting to work. While, in the United States, other European countries, experts were to prepare something, then there's a decision, you come to a common decision, the boss signs off, and you're already on your way.
Yeah.
In France, the boss has to give the go ahead, and then the people work. I've seen a lot of people not doing anything about anything, something, but even if it was necessary, it said the boss hasn't decided yet. So I stepped right into that trap, and interesting enough, that if that would have been, for example, an American CEO, and I would have stayed put and do nothing, that CEO would have actually called me and say, put your finger out of wherever it is. I told you, we talked about it. We have a mutual understanding. Do it. Yeah, you're wasting my money if you don't work with the guy. So 2 different countries, totally 2 different approaches. So failure, unfortunately, we still talk to each other. Everything, the relationship is up and running. The client is gone.
So that's so important. And again, when we put out this content for people to listen to, I mean, we're talking to people that can continue to learn about cultural differences. And the more we understand about our foundation, what makes us different, unique, and beautiful at the same time, because there is something maybe in French culture that there's a reason for that kind of way of conducting business versus
Yes.
American culture is slightly different. And the more we seek to understand and build that foundation, again, as up and coming professionals, this information is so critical to your success. But you have more stories to share with us. You talk about some very specific stereotypes or additional examples we might want to think about.
Yes. So the thing is, what's your guiding light when you enter a new country? So, for example, 2 years ago, I started to work with a Russian team.
Mm-hmm.
Never been to Russia. You have your ideas about Russia, which might basically be prejudice. And then there's a couple of stereotypes, and quite
Mm-hmm.
interesting. So if you go for, some of the typical stereotypes is Germans are strict and direct. French are more indirect, and so we could go for the whole list. And Russians don't smile to strangers, by the way, which is something that McDonald's experienced, because McDonald's employees wouldn't smile at the guest because it's seen as a weakness if you smile at a stranger. So we have those prejudice, but at a certain time, we didn't grow up, but that's all we have. And I realized I'd rather work with a little bit, even when there's bias in there, which is an important aspect about intercultural work. At least you have something. So everybody who travels to, and I've got to be careful, I don't want to insult anyone here, but if you travel to Canada or to Switzerland, national pride is very important. You don't go to insult these countries, but just make sure to make critical comments because they don't take it well. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you go to Germany, yeah, I'm German, so maybe that's easier for me, but insult them and they'd say, yeah, I know it's bad, right? So if you know something about the country, that's better than nothing. That's basically what I probably want to say as a guideline here.
I mean, that's so important. Obviously that's the work that you do when you work within an organization or work across organizations. You bring that perspective is just do not pass go until we understand what we have in front of us and find that point of commonality, which will lead into our next conversation. But people can do this on their own. I mean, if we just take the time to simply say, how can I connect with these humans that I'm about to interface with? I don't know them. How do I quickly build a relationship? And it's not just the person in front of us, but it's all those gifts and idiosyncrasies and things that make us unique. There's book, there's information one should seek to understand, makes mistakes, but we're at least one step closer in building some great relationships. But you have another interesting talk that you'd like to talk about, being an employee within a global organization and things they should think about. So share with me another story.
Yeah, it's so I the international part of my career, I grew up in a pharmaceutical company called Novartis, amazing company, and they had placed a focus on diversity years before I joined. I wonder why they joined, why they hired a German guy with a German family, but it's something else. Mm-hmm. We were sitting in meeting rooms and we had a fun game. That's 15 years ago. We were we were counting passports. Mm-hmm. It would happen quite often that you have 10 different people in the room, but 14 passports. Mm. So there was an interesting game to play in a way. So that's, the clash of cultures couldn't be more than, in this room happening. The thing is, what I figured out, so I've done the corporate world with a lot of diversity, and then, on my own, basically. I'm not saying the one or the other is easier or harder. It's interacting with different cultures, with different value systems, is always a challenge. And as you said, it's about avoiding the biggest mistakes. What I found interesting is when you work in a corporation, there is a common denominator, because ultimately you report to that same person. Your CEO, he or she might sit somewhere, but if you're from San Francisco and from Basel, Switzerland, ultimately there's one person where you could be both sitting in, and you all be on the same team. We're all wearing the same badge, the same company logo. So there isn't, and that's an interesting other component, that, okay, so we are different, but we play for the same team.
So important, because I work with up and coming professionals that sometimes their boss is of a different culture or background, and they're following the rules, having regular meetings, setting goals and objectives, and they think they're doing the right way and communicating in the right way. But we don't educate people, and that's the work that you do, to pause, understand how they receive information. What, to the other example, what is a go versus a wait signal? That is sometimes the missing component, and that's what I try to teach to my students, to understand the person, their culture, their background, to avoid making some of these mistakes, for which you actually have quite a few mistakes you've made.
And that, interesting from my personal perspective, that's a job in itself. I didn't meet so many leaders who were really, I would really call global leaders, who were fluent in that international language. So in my last employer, they decided that they don't care about where you are. It's about what function you're on, what contribution you bring. Okay. So we had global teams, meaning people from South San Francisco and from Switzerland on the same team, down to 5 levels below the C-suite. This means you have mixed teams. I'm part of a team on 2 continents, 9 hours apart, down to the subject matter expert level. And I'm always careful with judgment. By the way, on the international stage, just be super careful with any kind of judgment, because it's always wrong. Whatever you do, it's always wrong. But asking subject matter experts, for example, regulatory people in the pharmaceutical environment, engineers in an automotive, doesn't matter who, asking these people to additionally manage the complexities of global dynamics, that's a big ask. And you got to be aware that it's going to take some of your employees' energies to harmonize thinking, approach, and all of this with people from other parts of the world.
You bring up a really good point, and this is, again, somebody I interviewed. We do so much doing versus thinking. And the more percentage of our time when we enter into these cross-functional, cross-continent, cross-diversity initiatives, we need to spend more time in the thinking phase, in the planning phase, understanding the cards that are in front of us before racing to doing. I talk to professionals, and we need more time in the define stage, understand their gifts, because that's going to lead to some of more successful work that companies do to go through those major changes, cultural transformations.
So a little trick I learned from in a very wonderful training back when I was at Roche Pharmaceuticals. It was handling your unconscious bias, which is crucial, especially in the international stage. So before you go into a meeting, or you're already in the meeting, just take a little bit of time and make a list of all the assumptions you have. That's your unconscious. You try to make your unconscious bias more conscious.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you work with a Russian team, Russians always eat borscht, which is this soup thing with, and so on and so forth. So make a list of this. And interesting, just by putting it into your forehead, like making it accessible for you, makes you better in dealing with them. and better dealing with different cultures, because the bias is there. And this is that would be a strong recommendation if you go into an unknown situation. And sometimes it only takes 30 seconds. Just make yourself aware of potential biases that you have. What kind of assumptions do you have? And that's an interesting journey, Deb.
All right, so you are a wealth of knowledge. We need to bring this wonderful 15 extra minutes we got to spend with each other and share your knowledge with others. I know people that watch and follow me, this will be very valuable to think about this global cross-cultural society we have. We're going to definitely get better results. Any last things that you want to share, how people can get a hold of you?
Getting a hold of me is probably LinkedIn. If you want to look for Dirk H. Horn, that's probably the easiest. In the Gigster economy, I find sometimes we handle more than one email address, but LinkedIn is the go-to source.
All right, Dirk, thank you so much for your time. I enjoy the start of this relationship. Hopefully it keeps going. And I know people who follow or listen to this will be fantastic. So thank you so much, Dirk.
Thank you so much, Deb.